everyone. I'm Allison. Thank you for joining me for Where I'm From 120 with Tamara. This is our second try. Everything just froze on me a minute ago. What are you reading? I read Exit Interview, The Life and Death of My Ambitious Career by Christy Coulter, which is about her, I believe, 12 years at Amazon. And I just felt like it was a really insightful read about the invisibility that she experienced being a part of that environment. No matter how hard she worked, didn't matter. Okay, this happens from time to time. We're trying again. And apologies, Tamara, you were in the middle of telling me something really emotional, and then everything went completely haywire, which is my least favorite time for things to go haywire. So I believe you were telling me that a friend of your son died.
Yes, no. So a close friend of mine who is my age,
Yes.
his son died a couple of weeks ago,
God.
just unexpectedly in his sleep. And my
Oh
friend
my
found,
God.
so the father found his son in bed,
Oh
like
my
no longer.
God. I'm so
So I've been
sorry.
dealing with that for the past couple of weeks. And
Mm-hmm.
then they had the memorial for the son this past Sunday. And my friend obviously was there.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day on Monday, my friend started having like heart palpitations. So we went to the ER. They
Mm-hmm.
sent him home and said it was just anxiety. He was driving home, and
Mm-hmm.
after 2 minutes, his brother was driving. He said, "People die of broken hearts." And a minute later, my friend died 2 weeks after his son died.
Oh
And he
my
was
goodness.
somebody who had a perfect heart, who like cycled and did everything. And so he literally died of a broken heart. And so I guess I'm a little bit low in energy
Yeah.
today because of that.
Yeah.
But I think I've also been like thinking about the poetry prompt in terms of like him. I've been thinking, where is he from? Like I've been thinking about my friend and like how I could write a poem about him, which I intend to do, maybe using this prompt, which I thought was
Yeah.
kind of interesting. Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, how devastating. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, no, no, thank you. Thank you. So I'm dedicating our little our little get together today to him.
Yeah. I absolutely think you can die of a broken heart. So that's just, we have another friend who found their child asleep in their bed,
Oh,
dead. And that just, so every morning when I wake my children up, I'm grateful that I'm very like aware of that every morning because of our friend that happened
really?
to. Yeah, like you're here, and
Right.
I'm grateful for your aliveness.
Wow.
Um, so I'm so sorry.
Thank
And does he have a wife? Is there a mother?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't have
Okay.
a wife.
I
But
just was thinking of her if she existed and
no, but
how
he has a
devastating that would be.
daughter. So the
Oh
daughter
God.
just dealt with the death of her brother, and then two
Oh
weeks
God.
later is dealing with the death of her father. So that's like,
Yeah.
that's something. So, but
Oh my
no, yes.
goodness.
So yes, so I'm a little bit somber today if my energy is a little bit low.
Yeah, that's understandable. Well, thank you for sharing that. And my heart goes out to you and to
To
her.
their, yes,
Yeah, the
exactly.
whole family.
Mhm.
But specifically to her, I've lost a brother and not a father at the same time, many years later. So, well, would you like to read your poem now
Sure,
or
sure, yes, I
go
can
for
read
it?
it. Where Tamara's from. I am from torn stockings and polyester girdles, reeking of urine. Bleach stains hold fabric. I was birthed in a box of Kraft mac and cheese, bread in mother's macrame plant hanger. I reign from the Rubik's Cube I never solved, which will prepare me for a lifetime of not solving puzzles, crosswords, the question: why was my dearest maternal great grandmother murdered? Why? I hail from the circular mud adobe in the desert Southwest. Cotton candy sunsets, howling coyotes, the smell of creosote before a monsoon rain. I was picked from a prickly pear cactus. My purple fruit dyes fingers, the color of the black and blue mark the man will leave around my neck. Like the ring another man left around my grandmother's neck. I am from boiling water poured from a shiny samovar. I am from Sam, my maternal great-grandfather who died of starvation. From paternal great-grandparents who'd starved themselves to death. From stitches, broken skulls, and schizophrenia. From eat, eat, eat. From don't eat too much, you'll get fat. I'm from hovering and hooting owls, hungry javelinas who whack down garbage cans. A spongy lender's bagel smeared with Philadelphia cream cheese. My front teeth sticky with white goo. From my maternal grandmother, who snuck out to steal bread so her sister wouldn't starve. Her hands so strong she could crush cars, but instead she crushed hearts with her kindness, empathy, and forgiveness. I am Minna's granddaughter, Rose's great-granddaughter. I come from a lineage of mega matriarchs whom I bow to in reverence. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was very powerful. And I was when I read it, but hearing you read it, obviously, even more so. So, what was the experience like for you writing it?
So initially I wrote the poem after you and I first spoke.
Okay.
And then we ended up meeting a little bit earlier. So I
Yeah.
reread what I originally wrote, and I no longer wanted it for some reason. And it was a very different poem.
Interesting.
So after we had a new date, which is today, to meet, I rewrote the poem all again, and it was just a completely different poem than the first one. So I thought that that was really interesting.
It is, I think it's so interesting to think about how many iterations there are of the poem that exist within all of us. Like I think probably endless. Like we are from so many places. We hold so many histories and truths and experiences. But you're happy with this one. You're glad this is the one you shared.
I think, yes.
Content. I don't know if happy is the right whatever word you would choose. Whatever adjective you would choose.
Yeah. I think so much has changed in the world, with what's going on.
Yeah.
And my poem, I have a couple of identities that are very much in the middle of the conflict that's happening in the world right now. And my
Yeah.
first poem was about that, but it
Mm-hmm.
was before all of this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really want to bring that into this poem. It's too
Mm-hmm.
close to me right now
Mm-hmm.
that I just decided not to include those parts of my identity. So
Yeah.
this poem was really kind of almost a covering up of that. It was
Mm-hmm.
almost like I was having to write, I felt like mysteriously in a way,
Oh, interesting.
which I've found that in years, I've really trained my writing to be, I used to kind of always, because I come from very complicated background,
Mm-hmm.
I used to kind of use poetry as a way that I could speak about things without saying the thing directly.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that in this poem, because now I write a lot of prose, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'm very direct about my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel that in a poem, you can say the thing without saying the thing.
Agreed.
And so I think that that was kind of the experience that I had in this second iteration. And I'm not saying that it was just, I felt like it was an interesting experience. But I
Mm-hmm.
do I like the first poem, which I can use possibly at a different time for something else. But I like this one because it kind of got at something I wasn't, I feel like in writing, it's almost like our unconscious subconscious comes out and it brings out themes that we're not even aware of. And I felt
Yes.
that this had themes that I didn't really know I was writing to
Mm.
until I kind of read it multiple times. And I was like, wow, this really has to do about starvation and not
Mm.
eating, food deprivation. And
Mm.
that wasn't something that I had really thought about.
Yeah. And obviously the matriarchs, that's explicitly running through it. Which I've written a few of these myself, and I want to write one a year. We'll see if I do it. But the last one for me was about that a bit. And my grandmother died. My maternal grandmother mysteriously was most likely murdered. And I think as I have shared that story, I find that there's a lot of people who have those kinds of stories in their lineages. And I don't know if yours was what it was about. Mine was about mental illness that nobody wanted to deal with, so they just got rid of her. Um, and and I think the poem helped me frame it in a way
Mm-hmm.
that, even though I knew it and how it's influenced myself and my own mother, um, and how that's used as a cudgel to uh, encourage good behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, was it your great grandmother and your grandmother who were murdered or killed?
Well, I come from a Holocaust family,
Okay.
so
Wow, you really do have the intersection of
yes, so
that.
I
Okay.
really do like my great grandmother, my great grandfather. I mean, it just goes on,
Yeah.
almost all
Yeah.
of my maternal family
Yeah.
um, was murdered. My grandmother was survived.
Hmm.
And so I think a lot about this in my work.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I kind of came into the world. My mother's an only child. I'm an only child. So we have a tiny little family.
Hmm.
So yes, so there has been. And like going back to my friend that I was talking about at the beginning, I
Hmm.
didn't realize it until I wrote this line, but his father was murdered when he was a child from a very different way than the Holocaust.
Hmm.
But I hadn't realized like that I had even put that in here and I kind
Hmm.
of had dedicated this to him. So
Hmm.
maybe that is kind of a theme that I hadn't really thought about as well.
I'm sorry for all your loss.
Thank you.
Um, yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't. Excuse me. I didn't realize that the side of your family was Jewish. I knew because I've read some of your work that your father was Muslim. So I had assumed you were talking about that, but you're talking about both. So that must be really a lot to hold.
Yeah, and that goes back to my very complicated
Yeah.
identity, all that's going on in the Middle East right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
My first poem was directly addressing those
Hmm.
my hybrid identity of being both religions and both
Hmm.
cultures, both identities. But it's just too much for me to speak about now.
I
So
get
that
it.
was kind of
I really do because it's vulnerable and it's people are really coming hard at people right now for just sharing what's real for them and wanting it to be politically succinct, which isn't realistic with life.
exactly. And I mean, just to say that I feel like people with lived experience, their voices are being silenced right now, where
Yeah.
they should actually be the ones that are
Yeah.
able to right now.
Yeah.
And so being an ally is being able to listen rather than being able to speak at this time. So I think it's really important right now that people are able to listen to those who have lived experience and those who share these identities directly.
I agree. I'm doing a lot of listening and I'm trying to ignore the noise that I should be doing something else
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I feel like when I'm in personal relationships, like when I'm actually in a relationship with somebody, I feel like that's what people want is to be heard. Um, and my performance of more isn't really helping anyone. So I'm just trying to do that. Um, you're welcome. Uh, so I was interested too. I've read your writing, so I know that you were married at 12. It doesn't, is that present in this poem or no? Because I know sometimes I think things aren't present in people's poems, but there are sort of, little clues. But was that in the poem?
No, it
Okay.
wasn't.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think like sometimes
You want
an
to write about
identity,
something else?
well, sometimes an identity can take up so much space that then
Yeah.
there's no space for anything else.
Hmm.
And so if I do say certain, like, sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to talk about this part of the identity because then there's so many questions that
Hmm.
follow where I don't
Hmm.
want to be the focus on
Hmm.
necessarily that all the time because that isn't my only identity. It's only, I mean, it's a huge aspect of my identity, but
Well, it's certainly, I think I can see that it's kind of like a headline. Like it's one that gets people, it hooks them. And so then they want to talk about that. But I can see also, as I mean, I think most of us hold different truths about ourselves, and balancing that is an ongoing challenge and project. And sometimes I just don't want to write about certain things because I write about it a lot. It's like I'd like to write about something else because there's more to me than that I'm a survivor, you know. Like
right.
I'm happy to talk about it. I talk about it a lot,
Mm.
because the more I talk about it, the less shame I have around it, and I feel like it helps people. But it's not something I think about all day, every day. And I'm guessing it's the same, even though it influences me and is a part of me, it's not something I'm thinking about consciously all the time. There's lots of other things that take my energy and space. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah, I think like that part of my identity does take up a lot of
Yeah.
space. Like it really
Yeah.
does in my day-to-day living
Mm-hmm.
and my reactions to things, my healing,
Mm-hmm.
the work that I do, that's always kind of at
That's
the
true.
bottom of
Yeah.
everything. For me, it
Yeah.
is. But I think that I have to purposefully almost be like, okay, this piece isn't going to be about
Mm-hmm.
this thing at this moment. Because I felt like this poem, the Where I'm From, I felt like it was really about my maternal grandmother and her lineage and her,
Mm-hmm.
and that isn't part of her identity. So I think that I
Right.
was able to kind of tweeze it out and then to just kind of look at that more so, like
Mm-hmm.
look at her, like where she came from and then where did I come from her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what I felt a lot of that. And I think I want circling back to what you were saying about poetry. I don't know if you've read Jane Wong or her book, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, but she's a poet, and she talked a lot about how writing a memoir, writing prose was such a different experience because poetry did serve that function of being able to talk about things without being explicit and being able to kind of, like you say, go into those spaces and explore them without having like a full, because when you're writing in prose, people have questions and, you can choose not to answer them, but you can't not answer all of them because then it doesn't really work. So it's, I have liked this poem because this prompt and listening to all these poems because it has brought to the forefront for me how important details are, like sensory details, and how they can tell a story, but they don't necessarily tell a linear story that you can track from A to B to C to D, and that's not necessarily their intention either. You can give people something to hold, and it doesn't need to be all of you or all of it. And that's definitely influenced me in a lot of different ways, my writing, but also my life. I don't have to give people everything all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. So I began in poetry, and
Mm-hmm.
so like I was accepted into Columbia University for an MFA in poetry. So kind of my background was initially in poetry, and I did love that ability. Like exactly, like I think that's the beauty of poetry. But I think for me to like move forward in my healing, I needed to move from poetry to prose.
Mm-hmm.
And I have felt that when I'm actually able that I have to keep my sentences together. They have to flow. I have to be able to answer questions. I
Mm-hmm.
feel that that has been some of my greatest healing. I felt like poetry was like my entry drug into writing, like it was what got me in. And it
Mm-hmm.
was so important as my first step. Just I'm speaking on on behalf of
Sure.
myself.
Yeah.
But then the second much needed step was the prose part of it, and really
Hmm.
being able to write essays, to be able to write memoir, to be able to cohere all the fragments in my, because I just felt
Hmm.
like my life was so
Hmm.
fragmented. And
Yeah.
in order to bring together my identities, prose was able to help me do that.
That's beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, is there anything else that you want to touch on or talk about before we wrap up? There's so much in your poem about survival, which, I mean, of your writing, I read it's all about survival, but like you say, this was more about starvation and food and the tangible of surviving. I just wanted to say that out loud. I think stories of surviving are so important, and I think this is a beautiful poem about it without feeling like it's dipping into that trauma place that people sometimes like from um, survivor stories, where you kind of cannibalize a piece of yourself, and they like that kind of like hit. I feel like you're walking that line where you're sharing a piece of yourself, but you're not hopefully giving up a piece of yourself in the process.
Yeah. So actually, while I was writing this, I was thinking about like my maternal side. Like my grandfather was a traveling, my great grandfather, who our family comes from Lithuania, was a traveling Hebrew teacher. And there were very, very few Hebrew teachers in Lithuania then. The Jewish language was Yiddish, so most families spoke
Mm-hmm.
Yiddish, but they didn't know Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And so during the Holocaust, like he traveled town to town teaching Hebrew, and he traveled by horse, and he didn't survive because he had no food. He ran out of food and water on the road. So
Mm-hmm.
that was his way of starvation. And then, like, on my, then the rest of the family, had all sorts of different starvation with regards to the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was thinking about my maternal side, my paternal side of my dad's side of the family. And my great grandmother and my great grandfather died of anorexia.
Oh wow.
And they stopped eating themselves. So they made the choice to stop eating, and they weighed less than 60 pounds. And then my grandmother also suffered from anorexia. And when I was growing up, she weighed 58 pounds. That's
My
how.
goodness.
And so I was thinking, and that side of my family, so yeah, I was just looking at how food was
Mm-hmm.
so different on both sides, but there was starvation kind of that like
Mm-hmm.
tied them together.
Mm-hmm.
Such it was so interesting when I was thinking about that. And then I was just thinking about food in my life, and like I grew up, which we didn't get into, but kind of going back to my child marriage, I also grew up in a cult, and food was used as deprivation, and we weren't able to eat, and we were restricted, and we always had special diets. And so I was just like kind of looking at that, like food deprivation. And I
Mm-hmm.
just found that really interesting that this was kind of coming through in this poem.
I agree. And were your paternal great grandparents, was that a choice they made? I mean, they had anorexia, so that's not a choice. But was it like, uh, was it
But,
faith based? Was it life based? Was it like reaching some kind of higher plane of existence, or they just were like, this is the best way to be?
um, I can't speak for them because I was
Yeah,
so young when that
yeah.
was all happening. But
And we never know why anyone does anything truly, but
yeah, but they came from a lot of trauma too. They
sure.
came over as refugees themselves to the United
Um,
States, and had had all sorts of trauma where they were from Belarus, and so they had
mhm,
all sorts of trauma from there. So kind of coming to the United States, and just towards the end of their lives, they just stopped
right,
eating. First,
right.
my great grandfather stopped eating, and sorry, first my great grandmother stopped eating and she died. And then, kind of like what we just began with at the
Yeah,
beginning,
yeah,
my great grandfather then stopped eating even more
yeah,
once his wife died, and then also died of a broken heart. So that also happened.
yeah. Oh, I'm
Sorry, this
so
This isn't
Sorry.
a very happy session.
It's okay. You don't need to be happy. This is not that space. I'm definitely not a person who's like, please, you must come and share only happy stories. Like I was on a call on I don't know, a couple days ago, and after the fact, one of it was about sibling loss because I'm working on an anthology in a community and all this about it. And so I was on a call with a bunch of people who've lost their siblings and to death, to be clear, not estrangement. And she said after, the thing about misery and company is together it creates hope. And it like got me because I agree, like sitting alone with your sadness or your misery or your trauma, or when I sat alone with it, it was not great for me. But talking to people about it, lifting the shame, lifting that belief that somehow sharing something that is emotional and difficult for me is too much to ask of another person, uh, has helped me a lot in my life. It's not too much for me. Tamara, just to be clear,
Yeah.
not like,
I hope
oh
it's not too much
no.
for the audience.
Well, I mean, that's up to them, but I think, I don't know. Life is really something. And I think that the more you dig into your own life and the life of your ancestors, like talking about them being refugees, talking about the Holocaust, everyone doesn't have that story, obviously. And I'm so sorry. Um, but most people got somebody back there. Life was really hard and,
Exactly.
and survival was not easy. And we're carrying that with us in our DNA. So, I think normalizing like, um, life was hard. Life is still hard, but like just living. Like he was on a horse, he didn't have enough food, he died. That kind of stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it still does in different parts of the world. And we distance ourselves from that reality, but it's still happening. So anyway, I
Right.
appreciate your honesty and please don't feel like you need to apologize to me.
Yeah, thank you. And I know, like, I really set off to write this poem and to make it upbeat. I don't know why.
I've done that to very little success. I'm like, this is going to be a happy one because there was a lot of happiness and joy.
Exactly.
Like I can do this, but like, nope, not. Mm-mm.
But I think the beauty is really when there's happiness and joy, and then there's also sorrow and complex, like that.
Yeah,
That's what makes it so complex. That bittersweetness of life. That it's like there's so
yeah.
much joy in this poem for me, maybe not for others. I hope you can see some of it, like like my mother's macrame plant hanger. They were all
Those
over my
really
house.
take me back to a time. I want to say that when you read that, I smile if you watch the replay, like, because that is like the 70s, right? Like those
Exactly.
macrame freaking plant things were everywhere. We didn't have any, but I'd go into people's houses and it was like, and it's not that easy to macrame, just for the record, you know?
Exactly. And my mom was obsessed with both macrame and plants. So we had all sorts of foliage just kind of
Yeah.
coming down
Hmm.
everywhere. Like every corner you'd go, there'd be, macrame plant hangers.
Yeah.
And, just even like thinking about like I'm a vegetarian still today, a lifelong vegetarian. I was
Hmm.
one then. And just like eating like my Kraft mac and cheese, it was like such a delicacy because
Hmm.
my mother was always into health food and she just
Yes.
made brown rice and veggies.
Yes.
But to kind of be able to have like this Kraft mac and cheese that I would just kind
Yeah.
of eat one little,
Yeah.
pasta shell at a time and be like, oh, this is so delicious.
I didn't have it until I was like 13. So I understand the health food. It was like a friend was like, make this. We need something. I was like, what is this? Like, I don't know how to make, I'll read the instructions. Like, she just assumed, obviously, I would know how to make it. Like, because people ate it all the time. But I was like, no, we don't have processed food. Like, that's not something. I mean, I bit my tongue in half when I was 11, I think. It hung on by a little bit of tongue, but they had to sew it back up. And I had a big scar and I had to eat jello for like a week. And I remember I thought that was the best thing I'd ever heard in my life because I didn't get to eat Jello. I hated Jello by the end, of course, because you don't want to eat it for that long. But I remember when they first told me, I was like, oh, there's no way out of this. Like I have to eat Jello. It's doctor's orders. Just gonna eat sugar all week long. It's gonna be great. It wasn't that great, but I just remember thinking like, oh, so I totally understand that.
Yeah, and like even like with the Kraft mac and cheese, like you're supposed to make it with milk, but we didn't even have milk, so I would just
Right.
with water, and I would be like, "This is delicious."
Yeah, that chemical tang. You were like, what is this? I don't have this anywhere else. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that, yeah, and I guess just lastly, I live in the desert, so there's just so much. We have coyotes and javelinas, and
Javelinas made me laugh too because I've been around javelinas and just even picturing them makes me smile and laugh because they're otherworldly a bit.
they are, but people don't realize, and like new people that come to the desert, they try to feed
Oh
javelina.
no, don't do that.
No, they are dangerous.
Yeah, don't do that.
And they're very, very fast, which you wouldn't assume,
Right,
but
because
they
they're
are incredibly
cantankerous.
fast.
I mean, they
And
seem very like, when you
yeah,
see them. Yeah. No,
and
I've heard they're fast.
they're very fast. And there's
Hmm.
actually a YouTube video of a javelina running that one of my friends took. If anybody just wants to put in fast javelina running, you will see a great YouTube
I
video. You'll be
will.
like, wow, I didn't know this was possible.
Yeah, because I find them kind of charming because I've never been bothered by, it's very much like I see you, you see me, let's continue on with whatever we were doing, which is how I generally am with wildlife. Thank you for appearing and showing me you exist. Continue doing what you're doing. And I've had good luck with that as my strategy. Hopefully that will continue. But yeah, I
Yeah.
saw Javelina and the whole family one night, and
Yeah,
that
they
was like,
travel in packs and they're all around my house and I have a whole family. There's like 10 of them and there's always babies and they're so, I mean, they look so cute, but
they
they're so
do. They do look so cute. They look like something out of a cartoon or like a storybook. Yeah.
and they don't like little dogs and we have a little dog. So you
Oh,
have to be
interesting.
so careful when you're
Hmm.
walking your dogs. They will attack a dog and so that's like something. So yeah, so the poem, and then like we have rattlesnakes here. On my bike ride yesterday, I just crossed another rattlesnake, like
Hmm.
just part of our landscape here. And so I liked that we were able to infuse that into the poem by the prompt itself.
Yes, I
Like
do too.
I love that we could bring in nature, we could bring in food, we could bring
Hmm.
in different family members, we could name family members. So I
Yeah.
thought that this poem really allowed um, like very concrete words, like
Hmm. Hmm.
really interesting to be able to do that. So
I agree. It's been very liberating for me in my writing. Like, oh, this is a good. It feels good to write it. It feels good to hear it. Like, it's important. The specificity is really
yeah,
is something. So, well, thank
yeah,
you for joining me and being willing and being flexible because, like you said, you were scheduled for next year. So, thank you for subbing in. And thank you for all of your transparency and honesty. I am sorry for your loss. I hope if you do write a poem about your friend that it brings you some, I don't know, communion with him, because I'm sure he's around you. So um, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And again, I love listening to all of your guests that you have. I've listened to all of them,
Oh my God.
and I can say almost all. I mean, am I number 120?
You are.
I knew it because 119 was, I love numbers. So I love that I'm 120. And I
Oh,
don't know if
good.
anybody knows, but on 12/31/23, it's going to be 123 123. So
That's exciting. I hadn't thought of that. So thank you for pointing it out. I
yeah,
love I love how many people are excited about the number they have. Because like a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm whatever, 114." I think that was Melissa. Maybe it was 117. And she was like, "Oh, I'm so happy." And I thought, "Oh, I'm so glad you're happy because it's random." Um, so I'm glad you're happy with 120.
yeah, no, because it's the 1 2. There's a lot of 1 2s right now. Like
Yeah.
with like our dates in 2023. So there's a lot of it. So thank you. And
Yes.
thank you to everybody that's listening. And I hope I didn't make anybody too sad. That wasn't my intention.
No, you didn't. So don't worry about it. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.